Hi, I am Dr. Felice Gersh, your integrative OBGYN physician. I'm going to discuss a topic that is so critically important. It's what happens to women's weight, their adipose tissue, also known as fat, after they transition and during the transition into menopause. Why is it that women say all the time to me, I'm trying my best. I'm trying to eat and exercise, but no matter what I do, I see my figure morphing. My waistline is disappearing. I'm getting a muffin top. I'm having a belly with fat. I don't know what is happening. And what is happening now is that women are turning to the drugs, and I'm not going to say too much negativity about the drugs because there is some positive stuff, but it's not a first line. So what drugs am I talking about? The GLP-1 agonists, the brand names Ozempic. Now it's for weight loss, it's Wegovy and Mounjaro. The weight loss version is Zepbound. And the difference between the two is that Wegovy, also, the same as Ozempic, is a GLP-1 glucagon-like peptide 1 agonist. When we say agonist, we mean mimic. It's not the real thing. It's a pharmaceutical that has similar. Now that and then the Mounjaro, which is Zepbound, is GLP-1 agonist plus GIP agonist, which is a different peptide. So it's a combination, and it seems in studies that Zepbound is a little bit more efficacious for weight loss than is Wegovy. So those drugs are now being turned to by the droves, and I think they're being misused in a huge percentage of cases. There is a place for those drugs, but it's not the first line when you're trying to lose some fat that has accumulated from going into menopause. And we're talking about 10, 20, 30 pounds. I'm not talking about if you perhaps need, although I would do other things first anyway, if you need to lose 150 pounds and you've been trying for years. So that's not really what I'm discussing in this particular program. So what is going on? The first step in solving a problem is to understand the problem. So what is going on in women as they're transitioning into menopause and thereafter that seems to cause weight gain? Now, it's not fake weight, it's real weight, it's really fat. This is really happening. Well, there's a variety of processes that are changing within the body that is promoting weight gain in the form of fat. So, what's behind all of this? Well, my favorite hormone, estradiol, is not being produced in first adequate amounts, reliable amounts, and then ultimately in no amounts from the ovaries when menopause has really completely happened. So estradiol, as I've said many, many times, is the hormone of metabolic homeostasis. Homeostasis is the mechanism whereby all living creatures try to live in harmony with their environment and have proper metabolic regulation. So what is metabolism? Production, utilization, storage, distribution of energy, the spark of life. If you no longer have energy being produced in your body, you're no longer alive. Well, it's very critical that every organism, every living thing, have proper metabolic regulation so that you have intake of energy, also known as food, to match the energy needs, which is energy expenditures for being healthy and storing just the right amount of energy as glycogen. That is the storage form of glucose. A small amount of that is saved in the liver and in the muscle, and the biggest storage of energy, which is fat, adipose. So it's very critical that this be properly regulated. Well, it turns out that this regulation system is managed by estradiol. There are appetite centers in the hypothalamus, that's a part of the brain, And those appetite centers, which involve the sensors for nutrients, have estradiol receptors. It's really regulated in large measure by estradiol. Now, GLP-1, which is a peptide. So what is a peptide? It's a small chain of amino acids, the building blocks of proteins, and they're signaling agents. They tell cells what to do. And it turns out that GLP-1 is very critical for energy expenditure, for burning and creating energy, burning like fat and so on, and creating energy, and appetite regulation, and insulin regulation through insulin sensitivity. There are cells in the lining of the gut that make GLP-1. There are also cells in the brain that make GLP-1. Same thing with all peptides. They're not just made in one place. Same GIP, which is in Mounjaro, is also made in the brain and elsewhere. So these peptides are really important, and they become dysregulated when you don't have enough estradiol. In fact, there's published papers showing that when women do take these drugs, that they work better if estradiol is given if they're in menopause. And of course, assuming it's on board if they're premenopausal and they're during the reproductive years and they go on these drugs. So understanding that estradiol is key to having the peptides managed and produced properly that are being mimicked in these drugs. And when you don't have enough of this estradiol being produced by the ovaries, you do not have proper production and management of all of these systems that have to do with regulating metabolism. So what does this mean? Well, number one, it means that if you are transitioning into menopause or you're in menopause, you need estradiol. There is no replacement that's equal. You have to have the real thing, estradiol. Now, we'll talk a little bit about some foods that can somewhat help. But the real thing, the real McCoy, is getting estradiol into your body, and not just a little bit like everything. Everything is dose related. If you don't have enough estradiol, it's not going to create the proper regulation of all of these metabolic facets. Now, one of the things that's involved in metabolism is burning fat. So what burns fat on a small scale? It's the mitochondria, these little organelles that are in cells that burn fat. And in order to do that properly, you need estradiol. There's this process called electron transport chain that creates ATP, energy. That, for proper functioning, for creating energy from fat, requires adequate amounts of estradiol. So what happens when you don't have enough? You don't have proper mitochondrial function. You don't burn fat properly. So what happens when you go into menopause is you develop what's called impaired gut barrier or leaky gut. The microbiome, this collective of trillions of microbes in the gut, becomes abnormal. You get a lower diversity and you get what's called dysbiosis. Dys meaning abnormal, biosis meaning life. So you get the life forms in the gut, these trillions of microbes become abnormal in their diversity and in their types. And when you do not have the right microbiome, you do not create the proper mucus protectant to protect the lining cells of the intestinal tract. So the toxins that are in the gut, these abnormal microbes, they create inflammation and they get right up to the lining cells. And the little fibers that hold these cells together, they start to disintegrate and the cells start to drift apart. And these toxins called lipopolysaccharides or endotoxins from inside the gut lumen, they pass out between the cells into the body itself, where the immune system resides, 70% of the immune system. Well, when these toxins from within come into the body proper, the immune cells go wild, creating inflammatory cytokines. And because the immune cells have estradiol receptors and they're not being properly regulated, the immune cells create more inflammation at a lower threshold. So you now have inflammation in the body, creating this whole system of inflammation. Inflammation creates more insulin resistance, which then causes the pancreas to make more insulin. You have higher levels of glucose, you have higher levels of insulin. That's the perfect environment for creating and storing fat, because that's what insulin does, among other things. It creates and stores fat. You cannot multitask, ladies. You can't make fat and burn fat at the same time. If you have insulin resistance and have higher levels of insulin, higher levels of glucose, which comes later, first comes the higher levels of insulin, then when the insulin can't control the glucose, then the glucose levels start to rise. So even before you have officially prediabetes, but you have insulin resistance, you have higher levels of insulin, you're going to promote the storage and production of fat in your body. So you see how this is happening? You create systemic inflammation, and when you don't make the right short-chain fatty acids. Now, what are those? Those are the products of fermentation by the gut microbes on the fiber foods that you eat. Fiber. We're going to talk about that when we're going to talk about in a minute, what do we do about this? Remember, first you understand the problem, then you create solutions. So what happens is when you don't have enough fiber, the gut microbes that are there, they don't create the proper products of fermentation called short-chain fatty acids. These short-chain fatty acids are food for the gut lining cells. They are also signaling agents to the liver and the brain, and they also combine to the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the parasympathetic part of the autonomic nervous system, which should be the part that is normal, like unless you're being attacked by a wild animal, you're in a injury situation, trauma, or you're being involved in a serious infection. The vagus nerve should rule, parasympathetic. Sometimes they call it rest and digest. But what controls a lot of that is the short-chain fatty acid called butyrate that's made by the gut microbes that actually combine to the vagus nerve and keeps you calm and serene. Well, when you don't have that, you have what is the alternate state that should be induced only when you need it, the stress state. That's called the sympathetic part. Remember, it's not sympathetic like, oh, I'm so sympathetic. It's sympathetic, S as in stress. So when you get stressed, you activate the adrenergic system. That's the adrenal gland. The adrenal gland then produces more cortisol. Now, cortisol is essential for life. It's critical for all kinds of things. But when you produce too much cortisol, just because you're in this sympathetic stress state for no good reason. It's not like you're traumatized, you're being invaded by viruses or bacteria. It's just that you're not getting the right production of short-chain fatty acid butyrate. So you go into this stress state, you make too much cortisol. What does cortisol do? It actually aggravates leaky gut. When you have chronic levels, it also increases insulin resistance. So you're going to have more insulin. More insulin, you're going to put on more fat and store more fat. So, wow, this is a lot happening. And this is happening in every woman. That's why even thin women, they often will have what's called sarcopenic obesity. They're actually great on the scale, and they might look even good in clothes, but when you do body compositions, they have not enough muscle, and they have too much fat, especially around the middle and around the internal organs. And often they will even develop insulin resistance, like that can lead to diabetes, and metabolic steatosis, previously known as non-alcoholic fatty liver, which, by the way, is really astoundingly high in its incidence in postmenopausal women, which further creates metabolic chaos and weight gain. So a lot is happening in us women, that is for sure. All of it trending towards abnormal, unhealthy weight gain. And what else is happening? loss of muscle. That's what is called sarcopenia. Estradiol is critical for the function, health, production of muscle. Muscle is the biggest organ for burning glucose. It's so critically important. Muscle has so many mitochondria. It can burn fat. It can burn glucose. You have to have a really good amount of muscle to be really optimally healthy. And the less muscle you have, the more likely you're going to have too much fat. That's why it's so important to get a body composition. Just getting on the scale doesn't tell the story, because your weight could be okay, but it turns out you have way too little muscle and way too much fat. And that happens in every woman if she's not getting proper hormonal supplementation. And as well, some women will have low amounts of the androgens from the adrenal gland, DHEAS, and from both the adrenal and the ovaries, testosterone, which can also contribute beneficially to muscle mass. So these are all critically important issues. What else contributes to weight gain? Sleep problems. When women go through menopause, their incidence of getting a sleep-disordered breathing issue like sleep apnea goes up 2 to 3-fold. So if you don't get adequate sleep, my goodness, you're going to have problems, I can assure you. You're going to have more inflammation, which triggers more insulin resistance, and that leads down the path. We know that women, for example, who work the night shift or have jobs where they have very irregular hours, like they're flight attendants, they're flying across time zones and so on, they get jet lagged. Those women have much higher incidences of weight gain and obesity and many other issues, but we're just talking about weight in this particular segment. Well, all women that transition into menopause essentially are jet lagged, because the master clock in the brain that sits atop the optic nerve, called the SCN, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, has receptors to estradiol. So if you don't have enough estradiol, the master clock, we call it, drifts, and then you have circadian rhythm dysfunction, and then you do not have proper sleep. And you also have dysregulation of your cortisol, and you'll have often too much at night when it should be very low. You don't produce enough melatonin, which then creates more levels of inflammation, and you have dysregulated appetite, and you get the night munchies, which is horrible. The other thing is, what happens when you have circadian rhythm is that you don't have proper regulation of insulin and glucose burning, because in a normal healthy person you have much better insulin sensitivity in the first half of the day, but you have to have proper circadian rhythm. So now that we know it's a very big issue why women gain weight when they are in menopause and transitioning, so what are we going to do about it? Number one, please get a physiologic dose of estradiol and progesterone. Remember, I said the dose matters. So many women these days are taking these tiny little doses of estradiol so that they don't have growth factors. Their uterine lining won't grow, so that they don't have any bleeding. Well, you're not going to get the same benefit, ladies. I am sorry. You will help night sweats and hot flashes, but if your goal is to be a super ager like me, then I am so sorry, but you have to acknowledge this is how we're made as women, and you have to deal with the fact that if you're going to have optimal levels for optimal health benefits, optimal metabolism, then you got to have enough to create growth factors, which helps to grow, restore, replenish, replace, and all of that, all the different tissues of the body, and regulate your appetite centers and get proper production of these vital peptides that you're now potentially paying $1,000 a month for, that your body makes naturally when you have proper nutrition and lifestyle choices and hormones. You make them yourself. These are not inventions. These are replacements. Nature invented this, not man. The man invented mimics of these critical peptides. You can make them yourself if you do the right things. So, how do we regulate appetite? How do we regulate weight and metabolism? You get the right amount of estradiol into your body along with progesterone so that you can actually regulate the systems of your body. you have to have the right amount to have the right gut microbiome, to have the right production of muscle, to have the right regulation of all the issues that relate to appetite regulation, and to have proper mitochondrial function so you can burn fat. It's that simple. It is simple thinking. In order to be healthy, you have to have the right amount of hormones in the right rhythm. Number 2, you have to have the right diet. Now, there's so much going on out there in the diet world. I mean, I want to be a carnivore. I want to be keto. Well, what do you want to be if you really want to lose weight in the long haul? And not just like lose some weight, but keep it off and maintain proper muscle, appetite, and lower your risk of like cancer, like breast cancer. The biggest risk for breast cancer is weight gain in menopause. Obesity is the biggest risk for postmenopausal breast cancer. I don't want anyone to have these avoidable cancers. My goodness, there's enough in this world we can't avoid. These are considered avoidable just by maintaining a healthy weight. Now, I say just, I know that's not easy, but it is doable. And even without these drugs. Not kidding. So, what kind of diet is the best for optimizing a healthy gut microbiome and to lower leaky gut? It's eating plants and all across the spectrum of plants. So you want to have great fiber. That's what creates GLP-1. You got to have fiber. So what kind of fiber? The best for making your own GLP-1 is resistant starch. So that would be, believe it or not, like cold potatoes. Actually, if you make those little purples, yellows, reds, and you steam them or bake them or boil them just till they're nice and soft, not mushy, you refrigerate them, make them really cold, then just add a little vinaigrette, a little bit of chopped vegetables, and eat it cold every day like a cup. That is like music to the, pretend ears of your microbes. They will love it. They will ferment it. And that will help to improve the gut microbiome so that you can restore the gut lining integrity and make GLP-1. And a host of other things come into play. It's so amazing. It helps you actually to have detoxification of the endocrine disruptors for estrogen. It helps everything. It helps to improve your liver health. And talking about liver health, what else do you want to do? You want to have time-restricted eating. As I said, even in menopause, even if it's not as good, if you eat most of your food in the first half of the day, what happens? You're more insulin sensitive. Your glucose level will rise less, so your insulin will rise less. So if you can, and there's data to show this, if you can eat, if you're really motivated, 2/3 of your daily intake for food in the first half of the day. Now, best would be a big breakfast and then a medium lunch, but if you just can't manage that, have a small breakfast and then a really big lunch. Now, I used the word breakfast and lunch, but I would rather you think of them as just meals, because any food goes for breakfast. You can have dinner for breakfast. Who says you're supposed to have cereal? I don't want you to have processed food. That's off the menu 100%. But whole grains, they're a wonderful fiber. That's why I talk against, except in very special situations. I'm not talking about typical menopausal situations. I don't want you to have a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet. Those are not diets that nurture your gut microbiome and enable you to make proper GLP-1, this really important peptide. You need to have a healthy gut microbiome. That means a plant-focused diet. And if you really want to lose weight, go vegan for about 6 months, and no processed vegan food, only whole, real food. And that includes all the legumes like beans and lentils, and that includes soybeans. But don't have any soy that's processed, and it has to be organic, so you can have tofu, miso, edamame, and that's pretty much it. So you don't want to have soy pretending to be burgers or hot dogs or cheese or something. No. And nuts and seeds, those are fantastic. Not a huge amount, but definitely have a variety of different kinds of nuts and seeds. And don't forget all the different colors of the rainbow for vegetables. And I have another motto: don't be afraid of fruit. I recommend that you eat many more vegetable servings than fruit servings. And the goal, this is really hard to achieve, but it's a goal, is to have 3 cups of vegetables at every meal. So that'd be 9 cups total for the day, half of them raw, and 1 cup of fruit into the meal, every meal. And I put fruit all the time into my salads, all kinds of fruit. I just love it with some good vinegar and maybe a little olive oil if you like. Fantastic, okay? Don't have snacks. And have a light, and if you can, as early as you can. I know how hard this is because I know I work late, but try to have the earliest and lightest dinner that you can. So tons of vegetables, lots of root vegetables. Root vegetables do not give you diabetes or make you obese. What makes you obese or having problems with glucose regulation, totally unrelated. It's your makeup of your gut microbiome, which is critical. Women and men, too, who have an abnormal or dysbiotic gut microbiome have high rates of insulin resistance, diabetes, and obesity. You got to nurture that gut microbiome. The way to do that is with plants, all kinds of plants. And root vegetables are great, like beets. Beets even are great for increasing nitric oxide, which is wonderful for your vascular health and other parts of your body as well. So plants, plants, plants. And you don't have to count calories. Please don't count calories. No one got fat because they ate too much salad. Now, if you eat, high caloric salad dressing, that's another story. So you don't want to use salad dressing as like your meal, okay? So only the lightest amount of the highest quality vinegar and a little bit of high quality olive oil. And mix it in and add in the fruit and the nuts and the seeds. You've got a delicious meal. All kinds of vegetables that you can put in it. And you can put in some, when you're past the vegan phase, if you were willing to do it, or if you just put a little bit in, put in a little bit of fish, seafood or poultry, or even a little bit of red meat, especially just once a week, just as almost like a condiment in the salad. And it's fantastic. I always say, have a breakfast salad, a giant bowl of salad. You will be so full for the rest of the day practically, and then you won't want to snack. And hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. Like lots of green tea, but all kinds of herbal teas. There's wonderful teas out there that are great. Ginger tea, cinnamon tea will lower your blood sugar naturally. And if you can, have a little bit of apple cider vinegar at the beginning of a meal. That is really good for lowering blood sugar. And take a brisk walk, if possible, after every meal for 15 minutes. That will also lower your blood sugar appropriately and lower your insulin. Remember, get that blood sugar down, get that insulin down. You cannot lose weight when your insulin is high. Impossible, because that's what insulin does. Make and store fat. So you want to exercise. Now, exercise for weight loss is actually more efficacious in the morning. I'll take exercise any time of day, but that is the best. And make sure you get adequate sleep, sleep hygiene, go to bed, try to get 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night. That's usually the sweet spot. And try to make your room cool and dark. I sleep with a sleep mask. Very important. Work on stress. I mentioned cortisol. When you have too much sympathetic output because your vagus nerve is not being adequately stimulated by the butyrate, well, you can do lots of other things besides that to create too much stress in your body, too much cortisol. Find a mind-body practice that you like. I personally love relaxation baths. I listen to soft music. I just close my eyes and I think of beautiful pictures in my brain of mountains and valleys and flowers and think good thoughts, plan for your future. That's what I like to do. Find what works for you. I also like guided imageries where you have a beautiful voice and background music and they take you on a mind trip. You don't have to have any training. And there's so many different forms of meditation. You can do walking in nature. You can do prayer meditation. There are a host of ways to lower stress, and that will lower cortisol, and that will facilitate weight loss. So this is just a start. Hormones, what you eat, when you eat. Oh, and I didn't mention fasting mimicking diets like Prolon. That is great because you end up not, when you do like the GLP-1 agonist drugs, you tend to lose a lot of muscle. In fact, the data from Ozempic says you're going to lose, of all the weight you lose, 40% will be muscle. Muscle is like precious gold. You cannot lose muscle and then be healthy in the long run. You need that muscle. So the last thing I want you to do is lose muscle. That's really a big problem with these drugs. In fact, there are drug companies trying to create new drugs to try to, go against the weight loss part of it, which is muscle mass. So, they're trying to create a drug for the drug's side effect. But in the meantime, if you do like Prolon, the fasting mimicking diet, they found that you can lose adipose tissue, that is the visceral fat, the fat in your liver, and maintain your muscle, lean body mass. That is so critical. So look into Prolon. You do it for 5 days, once a month, and you just keep going, in my opinion, until you get to your goal. In my practice, we start with what we call the anti-inflammatory gut-liver reset, which is an elimination diet and supplements to support restoration of the integrity of the gut lining so you don't have leaky gut, and help with the liver health so you have better detoxification functions of the liver. And then after that, that's when I initiate the fasting mimicking diet, Prolon. You can also do for weight loss the 5-2, where 2 days out of the week you do a fast or a modified fast, or you can do 1 day of like a Prolon, which they have like the 1 day Prolon. So you can do any of that sort of thing. And for people who are really, really like willing to do the hard work, you do the fasting. You do what I say is the anti-inflammatory gut-liver reset, to just help with your gut integrity and the health of the liver and the function of the liver and the gut integrity, like I said. And then you do Prolon, fasting mimicking diet for 5 days every month. The next week you just eat your healthy vegan diet, predominantly vegan, or if you have to eat animal, no more than 3 ounces a day. That's like the equivalent of a little chicken thigh or a drumstick, very little. And then the next 2 weeks, you would do the 5-2, where 2 days out of the 7 days of the week, you do a true water fast, a partial fast, modified fast, in which what do you do with a modified fast? You eat no more than 25% of your calories for the day, or you do the 1 day Prolon that they have now that you could do, so that you can do like 1 day and then 3 days later you do another day of this modified fasting mimicking diet. So, and then you keep going with that every month until you get to your desired weight. And by doing that, you're not going to lose muscle and you're not going to end up regaining all the weight. They've shown that, when you go on the drugs like Wegovy and Mounjaro, when you go off the drugs, you are typically expected, unfortunately, to regain at least 80% of the weight, and often quite rapidly, and you don't regain muscle, you regain fat. So over the long haul, this is no different, I hate to say it, than a starvation diet, which has been shown not to really work in 99% of people. So, because you'd have to starve yourself for the rest of your life, which very few people are actually willing to do. So I know this is complicated. I hope, listen to this again if you need to, because I just put everything into this for you guys. I want you to know there are healthy ways to lose weight. You can do this before you start going on these drugs, which have significant potential for side effects. Maybe I'm a little jaded because I've been around a long time. I've seen a lot of so-called blockbuster drugs that ultimately fell by the wayside. There is a place for these drugs, but I'm not sure it's in you. Why don't you try doing it the better way before you start using the pharmaceutical way? I hope you'll trust in your own ability for your own body to heal and do the right thing. Take care and good luck.